The exciting thing about this year's Lenten season is that it's a walk through salvation history, and it's not something we often can focus on in such an intentional way. And so we're excited to offer this series. And today we look at the flood. God creates humanity, God creates the world, everything is going great, and then we just massively mess up the way human beings are wont to do, and God is some kind of unhappy. And God says, I'm just going to start over. So God does a flood and wipes everything out, and then immediately God is regretting this decision. And so it's like, okay, I'm never going to do that again. But we've got to go somewhere, so God chooses to start, instead of with one couple in the garden, God starts with a family, with Abram and Sarai. And through their family, all the families of the world are going to be blessed, and all the nations of the world are going to be blessed. And that sounds like a great plan until we need more help. So God says, okay, we need some better instruction. I'll give you, the 10 Commandments. Or if you're a Mel Brooks fan, God has given us these 10 Commandments. And that helped, but people just kind of like, well, I kind of like 1, 3, and 5, but I'm not so excited about 2, 4, and 6. And God says, all right, if it's not going to work with just giving these tablets of stone, writing the law on stone, maybe I'll write them on the very human heart. And if I write them on people's very heart, then they will get it. But we don't. So God says, all right, that didn't work. Something more drastic needs to happen. So God sends his, son into the world. And through that covenant, through Christ, everything changes. And one of the interesting things about this is it doesn't really look like God knows what's going to work and what doesn't. And I love this because we think God is, all-knowing and all-powerful and everything. But, God is just trying to figure this out. And when God gets to the flood, God basically takes a mulligan. Now, if you know what a mulligan is, it comes from golf. And golf is... Samuel Clemens described golf as a good walk ruined.
I agree.
But the thing I like about it is in golf, if you're not a very good golfer like me, you can take one shot during your course and say, okay, I'm just going to start over. I'm going to that ball shanked into the rough, or I blasted it into the sand trap, and I'm going to put another ball down, and I'm just going to start this shot over. I personally think there should be 18 mulligans for a round of 18 holes, but my friends say that's excessive.
That's because you don't really play golf.
I don't play golf, and when I do, I'm terrible at it. But if God can basically take a mulligan with the flood, maybe, just maybe, you and I, during the season of Lent, can say, this didn't work out either. I'm taking this as a mulligan.
I appreciate you bringing that humanity to the story, because the covenant history is so huge. And as you work your way through Lent this season, and we go through these giant stories of Noah and Abram and Sarai and the prophet Jeremiah and our Savior Jesus, it can be easy to think, well, who am I in the midst of that giant story? But the reality is, we are children of the covenant. The covenant story is our story. And we are still living the covenant story each and every day that we seek to walk as followers of God. And today's story reminds me of how beautiful these big stories are, because it has mythological proportions that capture our imagination. Noah's story is an ancient one. And yet, long before I ever knew Noah's story, the power of the rainbow captured my imagination. No wonder it captured the imagination of the ancients. You see, when I was a little girl, I was raised in southern Indiana, where storms are a thing.
They are a thing.
You're taught what the difference is between a thunderstorm watch and a thunderstorm warning, a tornado watch and a tornado warning, and when it's time to run down to the cellar and take cover. All of that teaching and preparation just resulted in one thing for me: terror. I was terrified of any storm. The minute that the thunder started to roll or the lightning started to strike, I wouldn't wait to see whether it was a watch or a warning. I would run to the basement and hide. I was so scared. But at the end of those storms, something often happened that I loved. And I'm not sure I even connected it with the storms, but I loved the rainbow. When the storm ends, I would run outside and see, is there a rainbow? And if there was, I would jump on my bike and pedal as fast as I could to try to find the end of the rainbow. No one had taught me the Noah and the Ark story, but I knew the story of leprechauns putting a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And so I was riding my bicycle to try to find that end of the rainbow to see if there was really a pot of gold there. Now, as you can imagine, each time, no matter how far I pedaled or how fast I pedaled, I never found the end of that rainbow. Because rainbows fade before you can find the end of the rainbow. And yet, my hope persisted because that rainbow symbolized a promise. Many years later, late junior high, early high school, I finally heard the story of Noah and the flood, the ark, and the beautiful rainbow to symbolize God's covenant to never hurt or destroy creation ever again. And I realized that little girl who had chased after the end of the rainbow knew that ancient story even though no one had ever told it to her. We know that God promises better days. We yearn to be children of that promise, to trust in that promise. And so God gives us this beautiful rainbow. And since ancient times, humanity has known somewhere deep in our souls that the rainbow is a promise of hope, of a mulligan, of a do-over, of another chance to withstand the storms of life. Thunderstorms and tornadoes don't scare me anymore, but the storms of life still can terrify me. And this last year, we've seen a lot of those storms. And so rainbows, and sometimes even some double rainbows that I saw last spring, have been a little touch point to help me remember the promise, the hope that God's promise gives to all of us.
And just as you chased after rainbows, people have been chasing after rainbows throughout history. Just every culture has a flood story. And every culture has some odd story about what's at the end of the rainbow. I think the weirdest one I've run across is in the Middle Ages, where instead of leprechauns being at the base of the rainbow, there were angels. And the angels would give you gold, but only if you weren't wearing any clothes. I have no idea what this is about. I have no idea what this means. All I can tell you is that people have been telling weird stories and probably trying to get people to do stupid stuff for as long as humanity has been.
Only
around.
a church historian knows that story.
It's true. But the exciting thing about this story today, and since it's been told, is that the covenant that God makes is not just with human beings. It's to all of creation. And we have a bad tendency as people to judge something as right or wrong, good or bad, evil or righteous, based on how it affects us. And God says, no, 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 no. I am the God of all creation. I created the heavens and the earth. I love the heavens and the earth, and I called them good, and my covenant is with all of creation. So the stories that we have about in Genesis, where we are given dominion, stewardship over the creatures, it really is about taking care of this earth that God has given us that is good. And we are not to treat it badly. We are not to take it for granted. We are not to use it for our ends at the expense of God's covenant with creation. So let us, as we journey through Lent, realize that this creation covenant and this rainbow in the clouds covenant is with all creation.
And with all of creation, we can rejoice in that rainbow. And perhaps it can inspire all of us, if not to jump on our bicycles and chase after the rainbow, then to walk in the promise of that rainbow, so that we are creating the pot of gold that is truly God's intention for creation. Health and wholeness, beauty and love, life and life abundant, for the smallest little wiggly worm to the most grandiose eagle in the sky, to the tiniest newborn baby, to the oldest on the edge of life's end. We are the children of God's covenant, recipients of the promise of a love that never ends. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.